You guys, Erin here. I am back with another moon update for you. What I'm going to be talking about today is the full moon we have coming up here on Wednesday, February 12th. The full moon peaks at 5:53 a.m. Pacific time, and this takes place in the sign of Leo, 24 degrees Leo. So you guys know the routine. This is the peak of a growth cycle. Approximately 6 months ago, we had the new moon in the sign of Leo. I think it was like around August 4th of 2024. So over these 6 months, we've all been experiencing this opportunity for growth that is related to the sign of Leo. This is a time to be honoring that growth, okay? This is also a time, as soon as that moon begins to wane, what I mean by that is if the moon peaks at 5:53 a.m. Pacific time, by 5:54 a.m. Pacific time, the moon is starting to wane. So if we set the intentions in advance to let go of any of this Leo energy that may not be serving us, that puts us in the natural, like cosmic flow. Okay. Now, another thing full moons can do is they can shine light on something that you hadn't realized before. If you're somewhat familiar with your natal chart, or if you've had a reading with me, you can look to see where this would be coming through in your own natal chart. Which house in your natal chart does the sign of Leo come through? Okay, just as an example here, let's say you've got Leo coming through your ninth house. Your ninth house will be the house of higher learning or advanced knowledge. And all of a sudden in the days surrounding this transit, you have some kind of an epiphany. You realize something that applies to advanced knowledge that you hadn't realized before. Okay, now that's just one example of infinite, really, okay, how these full moons can really play out. Another thing to take into consideration is that when we have it really any full moon, of course, it's so unique to each and every one of us, but as a general rule of thumb, it's like we all become a little bit more we operate with more lucidity, or we even can tend to have this tendency to feel each other more. That type of thing can go on with a full moon. So these are all things to be paying attention to. But what I'm going to do in this recording is I'm going to break down the sign of Leo for you in pretty good detail, so you can really be thinking about, how have I grown in these ways? I'm also, of course, going to pull up the chart and show you the other prominent astrological forces we are receiving at the time of this full moon. And I'm also going to be talking about certain parts of the body that are ruled by the sign of Leo, because these parts of our body, whether you can feel it or not, some people, especially if it's hitting something in your chart, you will definitely feel it. But these parts of our body become sensitized anytime anything up in the sky is transiting through the sign of Leo. So if you just think about it, it's Luna in her fullest form beaming on these parts of our body. So it's a good idea, again, to pay a little extra attention to these parts of our body. So of course, I'm going to mention some potential herbal remedies to help support these parts of our body during this kind of transit. And as usual, I will be mentioning some gemstones that resonate well with the sign of Leo. You can always find a full extensive list of stones that resonate well with the sign the moon is transiting through in the description below. Okay, so let's get into this. The sign of Leo. This is what we call the fixed fire sign. When I say fixed, what I'm talking about is this desire to get into a rhythm and stick with it, like with consistency and persistency, maybe in like a steadfast way. Okay. But in the element of fire, it's all about energy. Okay. So it's fixed energy. It's fixed fire. Okay. The sign of Leo tends to run hot. It's like an oven, it's like in fact, for most of us in the world anyway, when the sun is transiting through the sign of Leo, that's the middle of summer. It's the hottest time of the year. Okay. Now, the sign of Leo is ruled by the sun. Okay. The sun is clearly the brightest light in the sky. The sign of Leo tends to be the brightest light wherever it goes. Okay. It's really kind of like the sign of royalty. It's represented by the lion, which when we think of the lion kind of like the king or the queen of the jungle, the sign of Leo is like the king or the queen of the zodiac. In fact, the motto for the sign of Leo is I will. This sign is directly associated with willpower. Okay. And as I've told so many times before, and he certainly doesn't mind me sharing this information, my father is a sun in Leo, Leo rising, Mercury in Leo, and Pluto in Leo. And he is just the ultimate Leo. He's 6'4". He's always worn a big cowboy hat, and he stands out wherever we go. And he's always going, howdy, everybody. How you doing? That sort of thing. That's very Leo energy. It's a very playful energy. Yes, it's super courageous, just like a lion, but lions are also super playful. This sign is very creative. It tends to want to enjoy life. It's a sign of pleasure. Okay, now does this mean every single person who's a Leo is going to, have all of these qualities? No, because there's so many things in our natal chart that can modify this or kind of they could just adjust the energy of the sign of Leo. But the sign of Leo in and of itself, it's the sign of playful courage. Okay. Now, how have you grown in these ways? And not only that, but let's think about it. Is there some part of your life that you've stepped into some kind of a leadership quality? Or maybe you've really, put yourself into, I need the willpower for this, that sort of thing. Or maybe there's been a little too much courage, or maybe there's been a little bit too much of, say like a ferociousness. A lion can be very ferocious. Maybe there's been a little too much ferociousness, or, maybe you've been too much of a leader and haven't let other people come in to take on their own leadership qualities. We might want to let some of that go. Okay. So again, as we go through this transit, be thinking about this. How have I grown in these ways? And what do I want to let go of that are related to the sign of Leo? Okay. So let's pull up the chart here and start going through some of the aspects of this full moon. If you're new here, I work with geocentric Western astrology. So with that said, what we're looking at here is basically a snapshot of what we would call the tropical zodiac at the time of this full moon. As again, we can see here, it is February 12th, 2025 at 5:53 a.m. Pacific time. You might want to see what time this comes through for your own location. As I've said so many times, and this is what I've been doing every single full moon since June of 2016, pulling out my journal, writing down the growth that I'm grateful for that's related to that sign, writing down what I want to let go of that's related to that sign. Of course, I apply it to the area of my life that this is coming through. And I really wouldn't continue to do this if I didn't see such incredible results coming from it. But I generally try to do that in the hours leading up to the full moon. Now, obviously, I live on Pacific time. I'm not going to set my alarm for 3 o'clock in the morning to write in my journal. In this kind of situation, I would write in my journal the night before. Okay, so that's something to take into consideration there. Now, all right, let's start with the moon over here. Here's the symbol for the moon. Here's the glyph for the sign of Leo. Okay, this is what you'd want to look for in your own natal chart. There's so many websites that you can have your natal chart calculated for free. If you know approximately what time you were born, you can look to see. When I talk about the houses, I'm talking about these things that look like a slice of pie. Which house in your natal chart does that little symbol, that little glyph for the sign of Leo come through? Look to see what that house is all about, the theme of that house, and that's how you can see how this manifests for you specifically. Okay, now, right away, we see these dark red lines going across the chart here because here's the sun over here at 24 degrees, 6 minutes, Aquarius. That's what happens every time we have a full moon. The sun and the moon are exactly opposite each other. Okay, when we think about that, going back to that, how we, can feel each other more, and there's more lucidity going on, more transparency going on. It's the two brightest lights in the sky facing each other, embracing this growth. Okay, now happy solar return season to all you Aquariuses out there. Let's see, we've got about 6 days left of Aquarius season following this full moon. Now, right away, we see this right here is Mercury. Mercury is pretty strongly conjunct the sun. In fact, a few days before this, we will be having a cazimi. I think it's February 9th. I don't remember what time it is. Cazimi is when the sun and the moon are exactly conjunct. And in fact, if you've got anything in your natal chart, say between like 20 degrees, could even go up to like 27 degrees Aquarius, you might feel like a little bit of a zappy information download coming through with a sun conjunct Mercury in the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius is all about information. In fact, Mercury is exalted in the sign of Aquarius. Okay. What that means, when we think about what Mercury influences, Mercury is like the ruler of the intake of information, but also the output of information. Mercury is the messenger of the gods. Mercury has a massive influence on the nervous system. And when we think about that sign of Aquarius, Aquarius is super electrical. It's an air sign. It's all about intellect. Okay. And so Mercury already very active in that sign of Aquarius. And then the sun comes up and it's like, poof, we're making this a bigger deal here. Okay. And not only that, but it's, again, especially since they're both opposing the moon, like the full moon shining her light on this conjunction. Okay. So one of the strongest aspects I see coming off of here, other than that sun conjunct Mercury, is this T-square going down to Uranus right here. So Uranus, as we've talked a lot about, Uranus has been going through the sign of Taurus since 2018. And Uranus influences incredible changes, revolutionary, totally unpredictable, strange, sometimes involving things that are of a technological nature. That's the influence that we receive from Uranus. And Uranus has been going through the sign of Taurus, which is a quite debilitated placement. Taurus is like the earth of the earth signs. Okay, so a lot of very revolutionary changes going on involving earth, but especially it's like the sign of Taurus is like directly associated with things like money and finances. And look at what we have going on involving, things like digital currencies, cryptocurrencies. It's been very difficult to work with any kind of predictive influence involving that stuff because Uranus is so unpredictable. Okay. And not only that, but Uranus is like kind of like hammering down on that 23 degrees Taurus because Uranus was in retrograde and then came to a halt. Okay. And is in that at 23 degrees Taurus, I believe, until something like March 3rd or something like that for quite some time. And so there's a lot of really strange changes going on. In fact, the sign of Taurus is also directly associated with things like agriculture. Okay, we're seeing all kinds of weird things going on there. This full moon very well could shine light on those things. In fact, I'm going to wait till I get to Pluto to talk Pluto going through Aquarius. That is adding to the very strange changes going on, things involving AI and robots and all sorts of interesting things like that. But if you've got something in your natal chart, say between 22 and 26 degrees Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, or even Scorpio, this is a really strong transit for you. This is it's like things are getting zappy. That could definitely be, it depends on what it is in your chart, but especially like if it's Mercury or something like that. An epiphany comes through, all of a sudden you can invent some new thing or something like that could come through. Okay, very, very strange changes going on, especially with this T-square going to Uranus. Okay, now let's see. Let's go to all this Pisces energy that's going on here. So here's Saturn coming through 18 degrees Pisces. So Saturn is what influences things that are like kind of cold and harsh and restricted and blockages. Saturn is like the bringer of very hard lessons. Okay. And in the sign of Pisces is the mystic of the zodiac. Pisces is flowy. Pisces is psychic. Pisces is very, very unearthly. I mean, honestly, as a good generalization here, Saturn going through Pisces can definitely like show us the sorrows in the world. Pisces is actually a little bit of a weepy sign. It's a water sign. It's sensitive. Okay. In fact, I've been seeing a lot of clients and even other astrologers who have some, whether there be their sun or something like that near 18 degrees Pisces where Saturn is, like feeling like they're isolated from the world. They feel, or they're just being like things are being taken away from them and it's harsh, it's sorrowful, that sort of thing, especially with this trine going over to Mars, which I'll talk about that in a moment here. But look to see in your chart if you've got anything near 18 degrees Pisces, because it's like there's some sort of a harsh lesson to be learned with that kind of transit. And then we've got here the North Node and Neptune very strongly conjunct in the sign of Pisces. All right, so Neptune, been going through the sign of Pisces since 2011 or 2012. Now, Neptune is Pisces ruler. Neptune is what makes Pisces that flowy, mystical, dreamy, psychic energy. And so much so that it's so unearthly that it can actually be like a delusional kind of energy that comes through. I mean, the beauty of it, if we think about Neptune, sometimes Neptune is described as a higher octave of Venus. Okay. Venus is the influencer of love and beauty. Neptune can absolutely be lovely and diffusive and this spiritual energy, but it can also have this tendency to be so unearthly that people, a strong tendency for things like escapism, whether that be using substances to have drugs or whatever it is, alcohol, that sort of thing. But it just kind of depends on how it's hitting your chart, but also how you're handling the transit. But Neptune is working so powerfully right now because it's right next to the North Node. The North Node is like what pumps energy in. If it's next to, like, if the pump is next to something, it's pumping the energy of that thing in with it. So we're getting this super high dose of this very Piscean flowy energy. In my opinion, it's probably a good thing that Saturn's there going, whoa, 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 we got to stay somewhat connected to our responsibilities here. Okay, so there's that. And yeah, here's Saturn making this trine over to Mars. Mars is the only one in retrograde here, okay, other than the nodes, but the nodes are almost always in retrograde. And Mars is what influences aggression and frustrations. And Mars is great for making us take action. Mars rules things like our muscles. Mars is the ready to go. If you look at the symbol for Mars, it's like Mars is there to penetrate, okay? And the sign of Cancer is very sensitive. The motto for the sign of Cancer is I feel, okay? And Mars it's like extra turbulent while Mars is in retrograde. I think Mars is in retrograde till February 23rd. Okay, so if you have something in your natal chart near 17 degrees Cancer, you very well could be going through something that's like emotional and turbulent and frustrating and that sort of thing, especially since we've got this trine going between the two malefics. Saturn and Mars are the malefics, okay? They're like Saturn rules things like chronic disease and Mars rules things like accidents or acute diseases, okay? And, we're constantly always experiencing Saturn and Mars, but here we have them having this conversation together. Depending on how this is hitting your chart, this could be kind of a sorrowful transit. But on the other hand, Mars also rules our muscles again, and Saturn rules our bones. So we need them. They're about strength, but just coming with those hard lessons. Also be mindful of things like the lymphatic system, anything that has to do with water or fluids. Pisces and Cancer are two very sensitive water signs. Okay, now where should we go next? Let's talk about Venus here. So Venus going to the sign of Aries, 5 degrees Aries. So this is maybe not her favorite zodiac sign to be in, but I happen to love Venus in Aries. Venus is, again, the influencer of love and beauty and harmony. And Aries is ruled by Mars. Aries is the aggressor. Aries is the warrior of the zodiac. And part of the reason I like Venus going into Aries is because it's kind of like people can be drawn to things that are of this warrior kind of behavior. But it really, all of this depends on how it's hitting your own natal chart. Because, say, for example, let's say you had Mars at 5 degrees Aries in your chart. If you do, you might be one of those people that's ready to go. You do martial arts or something like that, or you get a little bit of a hothead. And not everybody who has Mars and Aries is going to be like that. But that's because there's always things that can modify placements in astrology. But that's the kind of energy that Mars in Aries would influence. Well, then all of a sudden, let's say Venus is coming along and she sits on your Mars. She calms it down. Venus is like, hey, calm down. Maybe there's a new relationship, a new love that comes into your life. Or maybe if you're a female, all of a sudden you got yourself some new makeup or something like that, something to make yourself more beautiful. That sort of thing can go on if Venus is transiting something over your own chart. But again, for the collective, it's like Venus is influencing this, like being drawn to things that are of potentially even like exercise. Okay. Aries is very much associated with things like martial arts or just overall exercise, things going to the gym, that sort of thing. Okay. So there's that. Now let's talk about Chiron here. So Chiron going through Aries, I think for another year and a half. Now, Chiron has just been like drilling into this 19 degrees Aries. That's where we had the total solar eclipse back in April of 2024, 19 degrees Aries. So if you have something in your natal chart and you're 19 degrees Aries, I say with confidence, you've been going through something. Okay. See, Chiron is the wounded healer and has a lot to do with wounds that are so deep within our, it's like we don't even know that they're there until all of a sudden we're having some sort of a Chiron transit. And oh my gosh, these wounds from early childhood or potentially previous lifetimes, that sort of thing. But ultimately, Chiron wants us to heal from those wounds, especially going through the sign of Aries. Aries, again, it's the sign of self. It's like, let's heal those wounds ourselves. And Chiron is making a pretty darn strong square over to Mars here. So again, Mars is Aries ruler. So that square, which creates a force, a lot of tension can go on for sure, but it forces things to happen. That sort of thing, that I'd be paying attention to that in my chart. If I've got anything, say between like 16 and 21 degrees Aries, yeah, you've probably been going through something. Okay, now let's talk about Jupiter here going through Gemini. So Jupiter going through Gemini until June, I think it's June 9th of 2025. Jupiter is like the great benefic. Okay. Jupiter is what influences. I mean, when I say the great benefic, it's like Jupiter is the one that brings like the most beneficial energy from all those lights in the sky. Jupiter can be aggressive sometimes, but overall, Jupiter is like the one that brings abundance or luck or expanding things, expanding the consciousness. And the sign of Gemini is, I mean, the model for the sign of Gemini is, I think, okay, it's like the forever student. Yes, it is the sign of communication, no doubt. But it's, I mean, oh gosh, if you got something near 11 degrees Gemini in your natal chart, let's say you're trying to author a book or something like that, that could be triggering it. That could be, breaking up the writer's block sort of thing. But ultimately, I do feel like this is also, as I've said, I don't know how many, since, last summer when Jupiter moved into Gemini, I've been talking about, it's a really good time for studying, especially things that are of like a philosophical nature or even a metaphysical nature or something that's kind of above and beyond just your average school book curriculum sort of thing. Okay, again, especially if that's hitting something in your chart. Not only that, but we've got a quintile going up to the moon and a quintile going over to Neptune and the north node from Jupiter. These little pink lines, they can kind of be described as like spiritual in dimension, very metaphysical kind of connection going on between the moon and Neptune and North Node, which are already in that sign of Pisces and making everything super dreamy and mystical. And then we open up these like dimensions with these quintiles going over to Jupiter. Okay, now let's touch on this South Node. So then South Node's going through the sign of Virgo until it's either June or July of 2026, summer of 2026. So the South Node is like the drain point. If you have anything in your natal chart, especially currently right now, if you've got anything in your natal chart near 27 degrees Virgo, let's say it's 24 to 29 degrees Virgo, whatever that is, let's say it's Mars. Let's say you got your Mars in Virgo. Then all of a sudden the drain point is going over your Mars and you don't feel quite as active, or a loss of muscle, or that could even influence like accidents, that sort of thing. Say it's your Mercury. All of a sudden your mental function is not, so optimal, or your nervous system feels like something's being drained out. That sort of thing can be going on. So pay attention if you got really anything in the sign of Virgo, because between now and summer of 2026, that drain point will be transiting over it. Okay, now, lastly, let's get into Pluto here. So Pluto, the bringer of powerful transformation going through the sign of Aquarius, okay, till 2044. I was thinking about this. So Pluto is aggressive. Pluto can be very turbulent. Pluto can be kind of gnarly. Pluto, he breaks things down. He's the ruler of a death and rebirth process, like the degeneration of something. But Pluto is also considered the planet of power. Okay, Pluto certainly does not just go handing out power for free. Pluto is like, okay, you go through the death process, you go through the degeneration process, and then you rebuild something that's more powerful than was was there before. Okay, that's what Pluto influences. Pluto rules the psyche. Okay, and this sign of Aquarius is very much the sign of humanitarianism, but it's an air sign. Like the whole of humanity is going through this gnarly transformational process over these next 19, 20 years. But also that sign of Aquarius, being an air sign. I'm thinking about this obviously they've been spraying stuff up in the skies for years, many years now. I don't even know when it all started. Weird stuff, heavy metals coming down from the skies. But lately I've been seeing all this stuff about the weird fog that's going on. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can probably just do a search for it on whatever platform. There's this weird fog that apparently has been tested like some sort of weird bacteria or something like that. I think it's heavy in certain parts of Florida. And I was thinking about Pluto going through this air sign, like toxicity in the air, that sort of thing. But at the same time, humanity's kind of waking up to these things and realizing what's going on. I mean, some of us have kind of figured this out for a long time now. But more and more people are starting to come into this realization like, holy smokes, we have really been getting messed with, okay, on so many levels. And I do feel like Pluto going through Aquarius is going to have a huge influence on that. Some of it really awful, but then in the end, I do feel like we've got the potential to be empowered through that transit. And ultimately, if you've got anything near 2 degrees Aquarius in your natal chart, then you have been going through something, no doubt about it. And in fact, Pluto's going to be at 2 degrees Aquarius, I think, until the first couple days of March. Okay, so there's that. I think I covered everything I wanted to there. All right, so let's get into body parts. So the sign of Leo rules the heart, okay, also rules the spine, also has an influence on the gallbladder. So we might want to be mindful with these areas of our body, especially if you've already got like issues going on with the spine between the days of, say, like February 10th, 11th, more prominently the 11th and the 12th, and then even a little bit lingering on the 13th of February. You might want to be extra careful with your spine. Okay, but let's talk about the heart. So obviously the heart is a very important part of the body. Now, when it comes to taking care of our heart, I mean, just for years, not all I heard, but I've heard a lot about like eating leafy greens is good, not just for the heart chakra, but just overall for the functioning of the heart, eating leafy greens. And in case you haven't heard, this is like fairly new information that's been coming out maybe a few years now. Kale and spinach, apparently, like, I'm kind of giggling about it because they're like, don't eat kale or spinach. It's filled with oxalates. It's terrible for you. Which I think I wouldn't necessarily want to, eat a huge plate of spinach or kale every single day. I'm still going to put a little bit of spinach in I like spinach, especially when I make like a lentil soup. I love putting a little bit of spinach in there. Not everybody does, but I do. And there's so many vitamins and nutrients in spinach and kale that I think a little bit here and there is fine. When it comes to the leafy greens, from my understanding, really like the best, and I'm not a doctor, not offering any kind of medical advice, but the best kind from my understanding would be dandelion greens. They're the least amount that would have oxalates in them. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This is just stuff I'm reading. But also, and I know dandelion greens are actually very bitter. Some people love that, some people don't, but that's kind of what my go-to thing, especially if you've got a heart condition of sorts. But also, as far as herbs go, what I've been doing, this right here is hawthorn. And I actually been doing their hawthorn berries. You can probably see there's berries in there, and there's also the leaf. Okay, so hawthorn, both the berries and the leaf kind of work a little bit uniquely from each other, and hawthorn is good for a lot of things, but for the heart specifically, what hawthorn, the berries, and the leaf can do is basically like dilate, like in a relaxed way, dilate the arteries and the blood vessels around the heart. So, and as somebody, I personally have my own natal Saturn in the sign of Leo. In fact, it's at 24 degrees Leo. So this full moon is shining exactly conjunct onto my Saturn. And as I mentioned earlier, Saturn is like what constricts, okay? Saturn, it's a very astringent energy. And so just, have never had any diagnosed heart problems or anything like that. But knowing that about my chart, not only that, but my sun makes kind of a quincunx to Saturn as well. So knowing that about my chart, I like to relax the arteries in my heart. Okay. And, of course, you might want to look into this stuff. There's probably very few people out there that are maybe allergic to Hawthorn or something like that. They just want to be mindful about this. Check in with your healthcare practitioner if you already have heart condition. But overall, that's why I indulge in Hawthorn. Another one to mention here, this right here, is Motherwort. Motherwort, they kind of look like little twigs. Motherwort is one that can just kind of relax really the whole cardiac system. Okay. And I get these things that we live by the cutest little hippie health food store where they've got all the bulk herbs. They've got this huge selection of organic herbs, but not everybody lives in that kind of a place. So you can also order this stuff online. I do always recommend, especially with herbs, getting organic. I mean, I recommend organic for anything, but even some of the organic stuff isn't really technically organic. But herbs specifically are so fragile, and they will absorb the glyphosate and all the other pesticides and herbicides and all the other weird stuff that they've been spraying on us. And so I always stick with organic, especially for herbs. And you can also get it in a tincture as well. You can even get it in capsules. Okay, so there's that. Now, the dedicated zodiacal birthstone for the sign of Leo is ruby. Rubies are usually red. And again, my Saturn in Leo, like I've got kind of it's not a terrible Saturn. I've got my lot of fortune right next to Saturn, but Saturn is not super happy in the sign of Leo. So that's the part of my chart where I'm like, I better take care of this. Ruby is a super Leo stone. And in fact, for Leo risings, that's really like according to the Upaya system, the Leo risings, that would be the stone for them, especially if you can get it set in gold. There could be, and there's debate around this, maybe if you're a Leo rising, but your sun is in either the 8th or the 12th or the 6th house, might not be the most ideal. But overall, the ruby is like it's in the Upaya system. It's the sun's stone. Ruby, it's like when you think about what the sun does to us, it warms us up. It makes us feel more creative. It gives us energy. That's what the energy we receive from a ruby is, and especially if it's set in gold. Okay, clearly, and you could totally get like a affordable opaque ruby as well. So there's that. Now, some of the stones I'm going to mention here. These are probably my other two favorite Leo stones. This one right here is Tiger's Iron. This one right here is Tiger's Eye. You're not going to be able to see the difference between them through the camera. They're very similar. They look very similar. And their metaphysical properties are described very similarly, except I think the Tiger's Iron is considered a little bit more protective from unwanted energies. But overall, they are both fantastic for willpower. Okay. So that's why they so strongly are associated with this sign of Leo. And by the way, most of the information that I get about gemstones, a lot of it comes from Judith Hill's Academy for Astrological Medicine. She's got a whole course on gemstones for zodiac signs, but also through the Encyclopedia of Crystals by Judy Hall. Okay. So those are probably the stones I'm going to be working with here. And in fact, I'm going to point this out as well. These ones are usually in my bedroom, but this right here is always in front of my computer. This is Tiger's Iron, again, because it's protective, but again, also influences willpower. It does take some willpower to be making these videos so regularly. Okay, what was it? Oh, the one I'm wearing on my neck here. This right here is amber. Amber is also it's like resonates beautifully with the sign of Leo. And from my understanding, what I have read about amber is that in Renaissance times, they would put a piece of amber, like a pendant, or like just putting it on the heart to help open up the heart. If there was some sort of a heart problem, restricted heart arteries or something like that, they would wear amber for that. I also read that this might have been from something in Egypt, where they use amber for babies, like, put amber around the baby who is teething. Apparently, amber is supposed to be helpful for babies teething. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I read. Okay, so those are the stones that I am going to be placing on top of my journal. Again, I write my journal. I already told you about that. And then I like to take a few gemstones that resonate well with the sign the moon is transiting through, or just the overall astrological forces we're receiving, put them on top of my journal. And I usually put my journal on the little fireplace mantle. Sometimes I put it on a windowsill. Sometimes if it's nice enough out, I'll leave it outside. Okay. And if, again, you can always find a full extensive list of stones that resonate well with the sign the moon is transiting through in the description below. And if you don't have any of those gemstones, please do not feel discouraged or you're missing out on something. A new moon is always a perfect time to be manifesting more gemstones into your life. Okay, you guys, I'm going to leave that there. If you'd like to schedule your own personal natal chart analysis, we can go into your transits, progressions, whatever you're feeling. You can schedule a reading through erinwageastrology.com. I do hope to hear from some of you. And until next time, namaste to all of you.